Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Leslie Stahl. The White House now says the Chinese government has murdered many of its own people. Leader Deng Xiaoping and the other hardliners are consolidating their control over the country, searching out, rounding up the pro-democracy leaders, while Western businesses pack up and begin pulling out of China. Official Chinese television is denying there was ever any bloodbath, any brutality in Tiananmen Square, showing pictures of the arrests of what authorities there are calling thugs and hooligans. We'll be talking about all this with our guest, U.S. Ambassador to China, James Lilly, Senator Alfonse DAmato of New York, Roger Sullivan, President of the U.S.-China Business Council, and Chinese student Jah Howe. First, let's go to Beijing, where we hope CBS correspondent Bob Simon is on the phone and can hear us. Bob, what is the latest? What do you know about all these arrests?
Leslie, the authorities continued very methodically today to smother out what we call the pro-democracy movement, what they call the counter-revolution, with nothing less than a blanket of tanks and troops and terror. Chinese TV tonight broadcast a remarkable hour-long parade of beaten, swollen faces, people, young people mostly, men and women, or more often boys and girls, being taken brutally into custody all over the country. Leslie, if Vietnam was the first televised war, this is turning into the first televised purge, the first televised reign of terror. It's remarkable. Other regimes which beat people up and then put them in kangaroo courts and make them sign false confessions try to conceal it and deny it. China, for the last few days, has been advertising it, literally advertising it, on the world's largest television network. It seems to demonstrate that for the authorities, China's image in the international community is nowhere near the top of its priorities. The only thing that appears to matter for them is to reassert control at every level and perhaps to punish those young people who had the audacity to talk back to the autocratic old men who run this country.
Bob, can there be any doubt, any question as to whether this is working? I hear you've been out in the countryside. Is it working?
Oh, it is. In the countryside, Chinese TV is really the only source of information, and the countryside is 80% of China. But even here in Beijing, even here in this luxury Beijing hotel where we're staying, Chinese people who work here tell us that they're confused because the American networks, which they can watch on in-house video, are telling a different story than Chinese TV, but they don't automatically disbelieve the authorities. They're confused, they say. I think ultimately the official version will be believed, frankly, because the consequences of not believing it are too grave. This is not the first time a government this century has used the tactic of the big lie, and it's worked before.
Bob, what's it like for you now as a reporter? Is your life in danger? It must be extremely difficult.
It's difficult. I don't believe our lives are in danger. The Shanghai municipal government, though, today issued an open letter to all diplomatic missions instructing them to tell foreign correspondents to leave the country because the letter said some unexpected danger may arise and the authorities cannot guarantee our safety. I think we are still relatively safe. The people who are not are the Chinese people who talk to us. Last night on Chinese television, they rebroadcast an interview which had been on ABC News a few nights earlier, in which a Chinese man in Beijing, told of the carnage he had witnessed in Tiananmen Square. Viewers last night were urged to find this man and turn them in. Well, they did. He was on TV again tonight, but he was in custody confessing to his sins. So it's become not only dangerous but foolish for people to talk to us. The remarkable thing is that Chinese TV is doing so much of our work for us by revealing the wave of darkness which has descended on China in the wake of the tanks.
Bob Simon, thank you very much. When we come back, we'll ask the U.S. Ambassador to China about what's being called the Great Leap Backward, an issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation with CBS News White House correspondent Leslie Stahl.
About an hour ago, we spoke by phone to our ambassador in Beijing, James Lilly. I asked him what's going to happen to those people being rounded up.
Well, we only can go back into precedent and see what happened in previous roundups, campaigns, etc. You go back to the 1950s, after the 3 and 5 anti-campaign, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, the Socialist Education Campaign, and the various campaigns recently, what we've detected recently is a more flexible trend towards the dealing with people. But that was sharply reversed on the night of June 3rd, 4th. It now seems to be more of a reversion to the past.
A lot of the signals appear to be reminiscent of the Cultural Revolution and the way they handle things, the lying about what happened, the mind control business, the rounding up, the sense that there will be purges. And it's ironic that Deng Xiaoping, who was so abused during the Cultural Revolution, would hearken back, isn't it?
No, I don't. I think that if you look back into the entire career, it's not very unusual. He had a very strong role, let's say, in earlier purge campaigns. That he has been characterized by some as being a fairly hardline person, but also he's given credit for the opening of China and the economic liberalization. I think there's no question about that.
Ambassador Lilly, in the morning papers today, there are a lot of stories suggesting that the U.S.-China relationship is tearing apart, is disintegrating rapidly. There's a lot of anti-Americanism in their official press. What's your assessment of where we stand? President Bush keeps saying he wants to preserve the relationship. How is that possible at this point?
I think we've gone through many ups and downs with China, and I think right now we're going through a down, but I don't think we should sort of give up on it. I think that would be a terrible mistake.
The pressure on the president to speak out against what's happening and against this particular leadership is growing and will become probably unbearable for him. And the question will be for him, and I'd love to hear your answer, is how can we maintain relations with people who carry this out?
I would say this, that you could get some pleasure and good feeling about yourself by shouting from the rooftops your feelings. What really registers out here are areas where your influence is really felt, is in the Voice of America, is in the thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of students that have been trained overseas, and in the multitude of business decisions that are made every day on the basis of investment climate and trading atmosphere. That has a much greater effect than any sort of shouting from the hilltops.
They seem not to care. That's the message we're getting over here.
At the moment, you have a overwhelming desire for survival, and that takes precedence over anything. What we do is we play for the long term. And we don't look for a quick fix, a feely-goody about this thing. We look for a long-term solution. And I think that's what we're working towards.
Have you had any contact with any of the top leaders, or are you still having to deal with the middle level?
I've dealt with the senior foreign ministry officials within the last 2 days. And of course, as you know, I saw 4 senior leaders in the first part of May.
They expressed their anger directly to you. I know that they're very angry about our harboring Fang Lizhe in the embassy. They've said so on their media. They've publicly blamed him for the entire demonstration in Tiananmen Square. Have they spoken to you?
I thought that demonstration didn't take place, from what they said.
Oh, well, that's a point.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about the Fang Lizhe situation. There are some people who think that as long as he's in the embassy, we cannot have any kind of relationship with them. They're so angry about our harboring him.
Well, I would prefer not to discuss that situation. I will say that I have had conversations with him in the last 2 or 3 days, so obviously that's not true. It's a very sensitive thing. And it's best to do it and shut up.
Ambassador, do you think that particular situation can be resolved anytime soon?
I hope to God it can. I certainly do, because I don't think we want irritants in the Chinese-American relationship. But we Americans stand for certain things, and I don't think we're going to change. And I think the Chinese stand for certain things, and they're not going to change, and then you strike a deal.
Are you in danger, do you think, at all?
Well, it's hard to say. I think that when you have soldiers spraying at one of our apartment houses with bullets a couple of days ago, anybody's in danger. When you have these guys running around town, 20 years old with AK-47s, standing there loaded, you're in danger. Sure, we're in danger, yes.
Ambassador James Lilly. With us now is Jah Howe, a graduate student from China studying at George Washington University in Washington. Mr. Howe, I understand you've been on the phone to some of your friends and relatives back in China. What are they saying about these mass arrests?
I made 3 phone calls yesterday. I got the impression the situation there, the environment there is very chilly. People are quite silent. And the political roundup and political crackdown is going on. And also, at the same time, a political offensive, political propaganda offensive is going on too. And the universities, the campus of universities are almost deserted. And the authorities of universities actually said, this semester is over, you can go home. So the activists and the leaders of the students, some of them have already been arrested, and the others either went home or just left Beijing. And
is it over, the movement? It's over?
I don't think so. Although I have to say, the democratic movement met a setback for the time being, but it will come back sooner rather than later.
I have to, your country has a history of authoritarian, repressive government. There's no history for democracy. The weight of evidence says this movement doesn't come back. What makes you think it can and will?
First of all, it seems to me democracy and freedom is the current world trend. China is not exceptional. At the same time, the current democratic movement is not by any means accidental. It is launched by the students, but it involved, when it went on, it involved all works of lives of people.
I have to, when you call China, aren't people afraid to talk to you? Don't they assume that the phone lines are being tapped now?
Yes, I think so. They are quite cautious, much more cautious than before.
Are they in terror? Is that an expression you would use?
I would like to say so, yes. And let me finish my words.
Yes.
I would like to say, in my judgment, the biggest loser of this crackdown, of this massacre, is the people, is the ruling group who are responsible for the massacre. They lost not simply the legitimacy at home, but also almost ruined their international prestige and image all over the world.
What do you think President Bush should do? You've heard our ambassador basically say that the United States shouldn't do anything further because preserving the relationship is so important. Do you agree with that?
I would like to say so. First of all,
you do think that we should do nothing more?
I don't think so.
Oh, you don't think so?
I appreciated what President Bush has already done. As I said that day, I met him. But on the other hand, this is not the time of business as usual. For the time being, I would like to say, although it's very difficult, extremely difficult for me as a Chinese to ask for international pressure and sanctions against my motherland. But judging by the massacre and judging by the current political crackdown, I think there must be something to be done. I would like to raise 2 aspects. First of all, international pressures. Either United States related to the West European nations and Japan, in terms of rallying international pressure upon Chinese regime to stop their political crackdown there, or it could be raised in United Nations. And also, I would like to say, I think awarding this year's Nobel Peace Prize to Chinese democratic movement would be a great deal for supporting the movement there.
Very quickly, economic sanctions, are you for that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I just want to put it in terms of a principle instead of a detail.
Okay. Mr. Cha, thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you.
We'll come back with more in a moment.
We can't have totally normal relations unless there's a recognition that, of the validity of the students' aspirations. And I think that will happen.
Joining us now, Senator Alfonse DAmato of New York, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Roger Sullivan, president of the U.S.-China Business Council. Senator DAmato, we've seen these chilling, frightening pictures of people being beaten up for this demonstration that didn't take place. Is it time for the United States to take more sanctions or not?
I'll say I think that we're going to be moving in that area. It's interesting to note that our European allies are beginning to talk about that. They have a meeting June 26th, of all people. They've never really been strong on that. They're
June 26th, but that's...
Well, it's right around the corner. That's their next major meeting. I think we have got to summon our allies, the Japanese in particular. They've got a history of falling in and taking business instead of working with us. Now, either they're going to stand for democracy. We have here a situation where the Chinese government is literally gone mad. They've lost moral authority. They're attempting to assert it through fear, and that's what we see in this repression.
So you don't think the U.S. should take unilateral action? You're proposing some kind of allied...
That's correct, but I think that it is important that as it relates to military cutoff, that we see to it that that's done. And I think we should let them know that as it relates to high technology, that's going to be our next step, and we're prepared to go further.
But what about this argument that the United States should be the moral voice, the moral leader promoting democracy?
Well, I think that in the world community, that obviously is an important factor for us to be. We must be the catalyst with our allies, with the Japanese, with the European nations. And even though there may be some who will not adhere our call, we can't let that carry the day. We have an obligation to be with those young people, to be with freedom. There's a long march now. There was a march at one time in China. Now I think it's the long march towards democracy. It's interesting, Les, that these octogenarians in their 80s are using this incredible power to kill the people, to brutalize them. But the people really crave democracy. They're going to win out, and we've got an obligation to stand with them.
Let me ask Roger Sullivan, what are you advising American businesses that have interest there and who have pulled their people out for the meantime to do in the near future?
Well, we're advising them, and they agree to take the same position, basically, that the president is taking in business or in diplomacy as in medicine. The most important thing is don't do harm, and don't act emotionally. Think through what the consequences are of your actions. The companies are taking their people out. That's the first thing to do. I mean, you've got to protect the safety and security of your people. And then take a long look at and test your assumptions about how you're going to be able to continue, if indeed you're going to be able to continue at all.
How many businesses, what are we talking about in terms of volume, money, people?
Oh, well, we're talking about people, I don't know, about probably 8,000 or 9,000 people. We're talking about 600 investment contracts involving perhaps 300 American companies worth $3.4 billion. You're talking about $14 billion worth of trade.
You're not ready to say that they've lost that investment and basically kiss it off?
Well, no, they have not lost that yet. In many cases, these people would be able to stumble along and work in. But what the Chinese have lost is the possibility of that ever being expanded.
I'm a little surprised, Senator DAmato. I thought you were going to come on and call for more sanctions. I thought you were going to say we have to start economic sanctions.
I think
you're being more restrained than I thought you were.
That's the second step, Les. And I think that inevitably, I don't believe that the Chinese leadership is prepared to back down in the face of world opinion. I think it's when they find the crunch of economic as well as being ostracized, as well as their own people saying, you are really taking us back.
When you see pictures like the ones we showed while Bob Simon was talking, of putting people being beaten on television,
that's done for a purpose.
Well, but we hear
stories. It's
a very clear purpose.
Give you that.
The Chinese have a saying that the best emperor is the one who no one thinks about at all. It's sort of a nice concept. They just go about their business. The next best emperor is the one everyone loves. The third best emperor is the one everyone fears, and the worst emperor is the one everyone laughs at. What the Chinese government has done is very deliberately go from being a government that's laughed at to a government that's feared.
But I get, my question was, when is the time? I mean, everybody keeps saying, if they do this, if they do that. I mean, what are we watching? Aren't we watching the if happen already?
With a government, may I?
Yes, please.
Under this kind of a government, since their purpose is to intimidate the people, they have made it very, very clear by those pictures you showed, and by their statements and by their actions, and they'll continue to make it clear that they really don't care what world opinion is. And therefore, I think that we have to wonder, what is the value of economic sanctions here? We have to be careful that, that in trying to punish this government, we're certainly not going to influence it. We do not unintentionally and inadvertently create a situation where it's going to be more difficult or impossible to rebuild this relationship when it becomes possible to do so.
What's Congress going to do?
Well, I'd have to take a little exception at that, and that's where we depart. I think we do have the moral responsibility to stand with these young people. I think we have the moral responsibility, notwithstanding, for example, that Grumman, a major contractor and employer in Long Island, will lose a contract for a military contract. I say the president has done the right thing. And we can't simply equate this in dollars and cents. Certainly an immediate cutoff, a break in relations, or all economic trades, I think would have been precipitous. But we've got to let the Chinese communist leaders, those old fellows who are clinging to power, understand that it's not going to be business as usual, that there will be economic sanctions, that there will be a curtailment of our normal relations, and we've got to lead the world community in this direction. Now let me indicate there are other powerful forces. England, the British, they've got a major stake in Hong Kong. Can you imagine if you lived in Hong Kong and you're supposed to be turned over, literally turned over, to the Chinese control in 1995? What do you think the people in Hong Kong are saying?
What about American businesses in Hong Kong? Every big corporation that does any business in China has a headquarters, I would say probably all over Asia has a headquarters in Hong Kong, don't they?
That's right. Well, the crisis is so immediate that that's something they're going to think about tomorrow. I mean, we're talking about 1997 before Hong Kong goes back. They've got more immediate concerns. But I'd just like to comment. I agree, I think, with the Senator largely. But I would say it's very important that we not hurt the wrong people here, and that we not make it difficult to restore this relationship when it's possible. And nobody's talking about business as usual. Business with China has been devastated, and it's very important for us to bring home to the Chinese people and that their government did it, that we didn't do it. Don't give them an excuse to blame us for the pain they're going to feel.
Senator, quickly, last word. Do you expect there to be moves in Congress this week to take further actions or not?
I would say within the next 10 days, Les. I think probably not this week, but next week, as we begin to sort through this, as we begin to get the intelligence reports, as we begin to see the repression, I think there's going to be a move in Congress, and there will be action taken. And I think you're going to see further economic sanctions, such as, for example, the transfer of technology, et cetera, being cut off.
Okay. Senator D'Amato, thank you. Roger Sullivan. We'll be back with a final word. I'm Leslie Stahl. Have a good week.
This portion of Face the Nation was sponsored by Merrill Lynch, an investment firm built on a tradition of trust, and by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world.